Even that what may, you're summoned before the government panel. Even though you haven't committed any crime, you are informally charged with one. You are repeatedly questioned about your political views, accused of disloyalty, and asked to incriminate your friend and associate. If you don't cooperate, you risk jail or losing your job. This is exactly what happened in the United States in the 1950s, as a part of the campaign to expose suspected communists. Named after its most notorious practitioner, the phenomenon known as Marxism destroyed thousands of lives and careers. For over a decade, American political leaders trampled democratic freedom in the name of protecting them. During the 1930s and 1940s, there had been an active but small communist party in the United States. Its record was mixed. While it played crucial roles in the wider progressive struggles for labor and civil rights, it also supported the Soviet Union. From the start, the American Communist Party faced attacks from conservatives and business leaders, as well as from liberals who criticized its ties to the oppressive Soviet regime. During World War II, when the USA and USSR were allied against Hitler, some American communists actually spied for the Russians. When the Cold War escalated and this espionage became known, domestic communists came to be seen as a threat to national security. but the attempt to eliminate the threat soon turned into the longest-lasting and most widespread episode of political repression in American history. Spurred on by a network of bureaucrats, politicians, journalists, and businessmen, the campaign widely exaggerated the danger of communist subversion. The people behind him, anyone suspected of holding leftist political views, or associating with those who did. If you hung modern art on your wall, had a much larger social circle, or signed petitions against nuclear weapons, you might just be a communist. Starting in late 1940s, the FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover used the resources of his agency to hunt down such supposed communists and eliminate them on any position influence within American society. And the narrow criteria that Hoover to screen federal employees spread to the rest of the country. Soon, Hollywood studios, universities, car manufacturers, and thousands of other public employers were imposing political tests on the men and women who worked for them. Meanwhile, Congress conducting its own witch hunt, subpoenaing hundreds of people to testify before investigated by the House American Activities Committee. Cooperated, they could be jailed, contempt. Ambitious politicians like Richard Nixon, Joseph McCarthy used such hearings as a personal weapon, accusing Democrats, communists, deliberately. McCarthy, our representative from Wisconsin, notorious by flaunting ever-changing the list of alleged communists within the State Department. Egged on by other politicians, he continued to make outrageous accusations while disturbing, fabricating evidence. Many citizens reviled McCarthy, while others praised him. And when the Korean War broke out, McCarthy seemed vindicated. Once he became chair of subcommittee investigation in 1953, McCarthy's resistance increased. It was his investigation of the army that finally turned public opinion against him and diminished his power. McCarthy's colleagues in the Senate censured him, and he died less than 3 years later, probably from alcoholism. McCarthyism ended as well. It had ruined, if not thousands of lives, and drastically narrowed the American political spectrum. Its damage to democratic institutions will be long-lasting. In all likelihood, Democrats and Republicans who knew the anti-communist purges were deeply unjust, but feared that directly opposing them would hurt their careers. Even the Supreme Court failed to stop the witch hunt, condoning serious violations of Constitution's rights in the name of national security. Was domestic communism actual threat to the government? Perhaps the small one, but the reaction to it seemed extreme that caused far more damage than threat itself. And if demagogues appeared in certain times to attack unpopular minorities in the name of patriotism, could it all happen again? Happy your time at home. The presidency of the United States of America is often one of the most powerful positions in the world. But of the US president accused of misusing that power, only one has left office as a result. Does Richard Nixon deserve to be remembered for more than scandals that end presidency? Find out as we put this disgraced president's legacy on trial in history. This is Richard Nixon. Oh la la. Now who's the defendant today? Some kind of clock? No, you are not. This is Richard Milhouse Nixon, the 37th President of the United States, 1974. Hold on. As a weird number of years ago, the President served. Well, you see, President Nixon resigned for the good of the nation. The President Ford, who took over. He resigned because he was able to be impeached. The rest of his crimes exposed. And what were these crimes? Your Honor, the Watergate scandal, one of the grossest abuses presidential power in history. Nixon's men broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters to wiretap their offices. They dig up that opponent for the re-election campaign. It was established that the President did not order this burglary. Scandal jeopardizing his accomplishment. It was President Nixon who proposed the creation agency and signed the National Environmental Policy Act into law, not to mention Endangered Species Act, Project Act, Expansion Clean Air Act. Sounds pretty progressive, hardly. Nixon's presidential campaign courted Southern voters through the resentment of the civil rights movement. Speaking in civil rights, the prosecution may be surprised to learn its Title IX amendment, banning gender-based discrimination in education and ensured that desegregation of schools occurred peacefully and here, but 18 so that students could vote. It didn't have concerned students after 4 were shot by the National Guard in Kansas State. Instead, he called bombs protesting the Vietnam War, a war he had campaigned on ending, but he did end it. He ended 2 years after taking office. Meanwhile, his campaign had sabotaged the previous president's postdoc, asking the South Vietnamese government to hold out supposedly better term, which I might add didn't materialize. So he fought after the war for years, in which 20 died for nothing. A presidential candidate interfering in the vote negotiations, isn't that treason? It is, Your Honor, a clear violation of the Logan Act of 1799. I think we are forgetting President Nixon's many foreign policy achievements. It was he who normalized ties with China, forcing economic ties continue today. Are we so short good thing? And don't forget his support of the coup in Chile to replace democratically elected Allende as a brutal military dictator. He was a fight against communism. With tyranny, but opposed communism to begin with was just the lower class rising up against the rich. President Nixon could never predict the violence of Pinochet's regime, and being anti-communist didn't mean neglecting the poor. He proposed guaranteeing basic income for all American families, still a logical concept today, and he even pushed for comprehensive health just kind of passed 4 years later. I'm still confused that this burger business is a crap or not. Your Honor, President Nixon may have violated a law or two, but what was the real harm compared to what he accomplished? The harm was to democracy itself. The whole point of the ideas Nixon claimed abroad is that leaders are accountable to the people. They hold them above the law, whatever reason. Those ideas are undermined. And if we don't hold them accountable to the law, I'll be out of job. Many politicians have compromised some principles to achieve results. But the law-breaking and cover-ups threaten the very fabric the nation is built on. Those who do so may find they are entirely tainted, and history is put on trial. Of course, I cannot get In 1905, psychologists Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon designed a test for children who were struggling in school to determine which children required individualized attention. The method forms the basis of IQ tests. Beginning in the 19th century, researchers hypothesized that cognitive ability like verbal reasoning, working memory, and visual spatial skill reflected and underlined general intelligence, or G-factor. Simon Binet designed a battery of tests. These abilities and combined them dividing someone's scores by their age and multiplying results by 100 yielded the intelligence quotient, or IQ. Today, a score of 100 represents the average of sample population, with 68% of population scoring in 100. Simon Binet used the skill to assess the general intelligence of both business nothing agreed upon the definition of general intelligence, and that left the door open for people to use the test in service of their own preconceived assumptions. But intelligence was started as a way to identify those who need academic help. Those people, in another way, often in service deeply for ideologies. One of the first large-scale implementations occurred in the United States during World War I. The military used it to recruit, screen them for officer training. At that time, many people believed in eugenics, the idea that desirable and undesirable genetic traits could and should be controlled in humans. The service breeding. Doesn't influence eugenics. Scientists use the result of military initiative to make erroneous claims. A certain ratio are intellectually superior to others is taken into account. Many recruits tested were new immigrants to the United States who lacked formal education or English exposure. They created erroneous intelligence hierarchy of ethnic groups. The intersection of eugenics and IQ testing influenced not only science but policy as well. In 1924, the state of created allowing for the sterilization decision United States Supreme Court upheld. In Nazi Germany, the government authorized the murder of children based on IQ. Following the Holocaust and Civil Rights Movement, the discriminatory uses IQ tests were challenged on both moral and scientific grounds. Scientists began to gather evidence of environmental impact on IQ. For example, as IQ tests periodically recalibrated over the 20th century, new generations scored consistently higher on all tests than each previous generation. This phenomenon happened much because the inherited evolutionary trait Instead, the cause was likely environmental, improved education, better healthcare, and better nutrition. In the mid-20th century, psychologists started to use IQ tests to evaluate things other than general intelligence, particularly depression and other psychiatric conditions. These diagnoses relied in part on clinical judgment of the evaluate to determine IQ. Apple's later research firm does not add clinically used information. Today, IQ tests employ many similar design elements and types of questions. They are tested better techniques and potential biasing tests. They no longer used to diagnose psychiatric similarly programming artists subtest scores is still sometimes used to diagnose learning disabilities. Advice of many experts. Psychologists around the world still use IQ tests to identify intellectual disabilities, and the result can be used to determine appropriate education support, job training, and assisted living. IQ test results have been used justifying horrific policies and scientifically baseless ideologies. That doesn't mean test is worthless. In fact, it does a good job of measuring reasoning and problem-solving skill as some up to, but that isn't the same thing as measuring a person's potential. Though there are many complicated political, historical, scientific, and cultural issues wrapped up IQ testing, more and more researchers agree on this point, and rejecting the notion that the individual can be categorized by a single numerical score. Speaking of questionable testing practices, should we get rid of standardized testing altogether? Find out what these tests actually measure in this video, or learn more about the infamous Optimus Use Workshop test in this video. When Reverend Jim Jones from Temple's Temple in 1955, he could have imagined the horrifying end. This progressive religious movement flourished in game sport, some of San Francisco's most prominent politicians. But in 1977, amidst evolution of brainwashing abuse, Jones moved to several hundred forward just of Johnstown in Guyana. Built as a European paradise, the colony Jones executed his final plan. On November 18, 1878, 909 men and women, children, died after being forced to drink poisoned lemonade. That grisly image has since been immortalized as sure-hand slang, single-minded, cult-like thinking. They drank Kool-Aid. Today, there are thousands of cults around the world. It's important to know two things about First, not all cults are religious. Some are political, therapy-based, focused on self-improvement, or otherwise. And on the flip side, not all the new religions, what we're referring to as a cult, what exactly defines a modern understanding of cult, and why do people join them? Broadly speaking, a cult is a group or movement with shared commitment to usually extreme ideologies that typically embody charismatic leader. And were huge turnout at Jonestown and Heaven's Gate, which ended in mass suicide of 39 people in 1997. Most cults share some basic characteristics. A typical cult requires a high level of commitment from its members, and maintain a strict hierarchy, separating unsuspecting supporters and recruits from the inner workings. It claims provides answers to life victims through its doctrine, along with the required speed for change that shapes anew into a true believer. And most importantly, it uses formal and informal systems of influence and control to keep members obedient, with a little tolerance for internal disagreement or external scrutiny. You might wonder, some of the descriptions might also apply to established religions. In fact, the word cult originally described people who cultivated worships of certain gods by performing rituals and making temples. But in time, it came to mean excessive devotion. This began as cult, but integrated fabric of the larger society as it grew. A modern cult, by contrast, separates its members from others, rather than providing guidelines for members to live better lives. A cult directly controls them, the family relationship, the finance asset, and the living arrangement. Cults also demand obedient human leaders who tend to be persuasive people. Cult really uses personal charisma to attract initial followers. Further expansion was humans give earlier members recruiting new ones. Skill to target often serves on those in new tune area, or whoever recently undergone some personal or professional roles. Loneliness and desire for many susceptible, friendly people offering community. The recruitment process subtle, sometimes taking months, establish a relationship. In fact, more than 2/3 of cult members are recruited by friend, family member, or co-worker whose invitations are hard to refuse. Once in a cult, members are subjected to multiple forms of indoctrination. Some prey on a natural inclination mimic social behaviors or follow orders. Other methods may be more intense, using techniques of coercive involving guilt, shame, and fear. And in many cases, members may willingly belong and from the cult environment discourages critical making others, and the ever around you is modeling absolute faith. The result in internal conflict, known as cognitive dissonance, keeps you trapped, as each compromise makes it painful admit you've been deceived. And the most commonly members that can stay harmful by denying basic freedom, speech and associations, causes stunt them in psychological and emotional growth. A particular problem for children who are deprived of normal development activities. Nevertheless, many cult members eventually find a way out. Meditation, influence, and cult external pressure and scandals. Many cults may be hard to identify, and for some, their beliefs, no matter how strange, are protected under religious freedom. But when the practices involve harassment, threat, illegal activities, or abuse, the law can intervene. Believing in something should not come at the cost of freeing community. And if someone tells you to sacrifice your relationships or morality for the greater good, they're most likely exploiting you for their own. In 1905, psychologists Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon designed tests for children who are struggling in school in France, designed to determine which children required individualized attention. The methods formed based IQ test beginning in the 19th century. Researchers hypothesized that cognitive abilities like verbal reasoning, working memory, and visual spatial skill reflected an underlying general intelligence, or G factor. Simon Binet designed a battery test to measure each of these abilities and combine results into a single score. Questions are adjusted for each child's score reflected have they be found related to dividing someone's score by their ages and multiplying by 100 yielded the intelligence quotient or IQ. Today, a score of 100 represents the average of sample population, with 68% of the population scoring with 100. Simon Binet the skills are assessed with general intelligence, but both then and now, no single agreed upon definition of general intelligence, and that left the door open people to use the test in service of their own preconceived assumptions about intelligence. Was the study as way to identify those who needed academic help quickly became used to sort people in another way, often in service of deeply flawed ideologies. Some of the first large-scale implementation occurred in the United States during World War I, when the military used the IQ test to sort recruits. and screaming officer training. At that time, many people believed in eugenics, the idea that desirable and undesirable genetic trait could and should be controlled in humans through selective breeding. There are many problems with this line of thinking. Among them, the idea that intelligence was not only fixed, inherited, but also linked to a person's race. Under the influence of eugenics, scientists used the military initiative to make erroneous claims that certain racial groups were intellectually superior. When recruits tested for new immigrants to the United States who lacked the form or English language exposures, they created erroneous intelligence hierarchy of ethnic groups. Intersection eugenics and IQ testing influenced not only science but policy as well. In 1924, the state of Virginia created a policy of low IQ score, a decision the United States Supreme Court upheld. It's not Germany. The government authorized the murder of children based on low IQ. Following the Holocaust and Civil Rights Movement, the discriminatory uses IQ tests, which are both moral and scientific grounds. Scientists began to use evidence environmental impact on IQ. For example, as IQ test is periodically recalibrated over the 20th century, new generation scored consistently higher on all tests than its previous generation. This phenomenon, known as the fringe effect, happened much too fast because it inherited evolutionary trait. Instead, the cause was likely environmental: improved education, better healthcare, and better nutrition. In the mid-20th century, psychologists also attempted to use IQ tests to evaluate things as general intelligence, particularly schizophrenia, depression, and psychiatric conditions. This diagnosis relied on past judgment bias used to determine IQ. A practice later researcher found does not yield clinically useful information. Today, IQ tests employ many similar design elements and types of questions which are detected identifying potential bias in tests. They are no longer used to diagnose psychiatric conditions, but similarly provide subtest score is still used to diagnose disabilities against the advice and aspect. Still use IQ tests. Determine appropriate educational support, job training, and assistance living. IQ test results have been used to justify horrific policies and scientifically baseless ideologies. That doesn't mean test itself worthless. In fact, it does a good job of measuring reasoning and problem-solving skill as set out to. But it's the same thing as measuring a person's potential. Though there are many complicated political, historical, scientific, cultural issues wrapped up IQ testing, more and more researchers agree on this point and reject the notion that individuals can be categorized by numerical score. Speaking of questionable testing practices, should we get rid of standard testing altogether? Find out what these tests actually measure with this video, or learn more about the infamous optimist user workshop test with this video. The presidency of the United States of America is often said to be one of the most powerful positions in the world. But of the U.S. presidents accused of misusing that power, only one has left office as a result. Does Richard Nixon deserve to remember former scandals that ended his presidency? Find out as we put this disgraceful heresy on trial in history. That's Richard Nixon. Order. The 37th President of the United States. Hold on. As we are number of years for President to serve. Where you see President Nixon resigned for the good of the nation. President Ford, who took over, he resigned because he was about to be impeached. The full extent of his crime exposed. What was these crimes? Your Honor, the Watergate scandal was one of the grossest abuses of presidential power in history. Nixon's men broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters to wiretap the offices and dig up that an opponent for the election campaign. It was established that the president did not order this burglary, but as soon as he learned of it, he did everything to cover it up while lying about it for months. Yes, but it was for goodness. He did so much during his time in office. The scandal jeopardizing his accomplishment? Yes, Your Honor. Did you know it was President Nixon who proposed the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and set the National Environmental Policy Act into law? Not to mention Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Expansion Clean Air Act. Sounds pretty progressive. Hardly. Nixon's campaign causes severe resentment of the civil rights movement. Speaking in civil rights, the prosecution may be surprised to learn he sent Title IX amendment banning gender-based discrimination in education and desegregation of schools occurred peacefully, and he lowered age to 18 so that students could vote. He didn't have concern for students after 4 were shot by the National Guard at Kent State. Instead, he called them protesting the Vietnam War, a war he had campaigned on ending. But he did end it. He ended it 2 years after taking office. Meanwhile, his campaign has sabotaged a previous camp peace talks, as in the South Vietnamese government hold out the supposed term, which I might add didn't materialize. So he protracted war for years, in which 20,000 more US troops and over 1 million more Vietnamese died for nothing. Nuclear negotiations isn't that easy on Logan after 1789. Or I think we'll forget President Nixon's many foreign policies achievement. He ties with China, holding economic ties continue today. Are we so sure that's a good thing? And don't forget his supposed coup in Chile. They were replaced democratically with a brutal military dictator. It was about turning violence the reasons we opposed communism to begin with, or was just rising up against the rich? President Nixon's coup never predicted the violence of a Venezuelan regime, and being an anti-communist didn't mean neglecting the poor. He proposed a guaranteed basic income for all American families, still a radical concept today, and he even pushed for comprehensive healthcare reform, just the kind that passed for 80 years. I'm still confused Your Honor, President Nixon may have violated a law or two, but was the real harm compared to his accomplished office? The harm was to democracy itself. He claimed that from abroad is that leaders are accountable to the people and they hold themselves above the law for whatever reason. Those ideas are undermined. And if you don't accountable the law, I'll be out of job. Many politicians have principles to achieve results, but law-breaking and cover-ups threaten the very public the nation is built on. Those who do so